Good afternoon to those who have dialed in from Asia, and good morning to those in Europe. Thank you for attending our webinar today. My name is Victor Phillimore, and I am a partner of Boyden, covering China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Boyden is one of the world's top-ranked executive search, interim management, and leadership consulting firms. We are passionate about helping companies and their leaders succeed. It is in this regard that Boyden launched these series of webinars, partnering with experts in their fields. Certainly in these challenging times, companies are grappling with uncertainty and the very survival of their businesses. We see companies simultaneously having to transform their product offerings, their business models, and their organizational structures. And time is not a luxury. All the more in this COVID era, are adaptive leaders and adaptive teams vital to any company across the world. We have thus prepared this webinar on adaptive team leadership for you today. Your webinar will be led by Craig McKenzie, who is Director of Transcend International, a global coaching and leadership development firm. Craig is a founding member of the European Mentoring and Coaching Council's Asia Pacific region. He was also previously president of the International Coaching Federation's Hong Kong chapter. Again, welcome to our webinar. Craig, over to you.
Thanks, Victor. It's a pleasure to partner with Boyden for this, and certainly we're very excited to be able to present to you some of our thoughts and ideas around just what's happening in the space of adaptive team leadership, and hopefully give you a little bit of a larger picture as well. So a couple of just things along the way is that, first of all, if you have questions, there's a chat box opportunity for you. So you can enter your questions into the chat and we'll answer those at a later time. We might pause at sections if there's questions that have come in. But of course, we're gonna leave the last 15 minutes for Q&A. We also want you to interact with polls. So the polls will automatically come up on the screen, and that gives you an opportunity to put in your input. We'll leave those for about a minute each. So if you can just be quick with that, it'll save us just sort of standing around and wondering what's about to happen next. And I'll tell you a little bit about myself and the organization in a moment. But first, we really want to learn a little bit about you. So there's going to be a poll launched in a moment, or am I launching it? I can launch it. There you go. So there's a poll that's launched for you. You'll see it, which describes you. So which one of these describes you more? So there's a bunch of us here today, so feel free to vote whenever you can. There we go. One person has done it. There, what's starting to happen. There you go. All right, good job, 12. Okay, we're 63% there and moving up fast. Okay, there we go. There's 3 more people that haven't voted. If you want to vote, go ahead. If not, I'll close this and you can kind of get a view of the results. And one of the reasons we want to do this is to find out what you're curious about so we can tailor the talk a little bit. But as you can see from the results, which I'll share right now, is you know, there's a wide spectrum of things that people are interested in, and we'll see what is best. But definitely the key one is improving my team's performance and team leadership. And there's more about teams, and this is focused more on that. So hopefully that will mean that you'll leave with things that are important to you. So who are we at Transcend? Well, we help individuals and organizations adapt and optimize in the face of increasing pressure, stress, and overwhelm in the context, and I'll go to that next. And we developed this sort of mission statement, this purpose statement, about 10 years ago, before all things started to change in the way they have. So we're very well positioned and very focused, deeply research-based into helping organizations in times of increasing pressure, stress, and overwhelm. So we have a lot of solutions that are quite effective. We've been very active over the last 4 or 5 months in offering a lot of free webinars as well, just to help people in general, because that's part of our heart, but also working with organizations in areas of resilience and areas of well-being, mental health and performance, balance, managing stress. So we have quite a large suite of offerings around that. That's what we do. My primary role right now is I'm director in Transcend, and that role includes the team coaching business unit. So I give leadership to that. I'm on the global faculty of the Global Team Coaching Institute, a certified team coach and team coaching supervisor, and I'm director of our professional academy of coaching, where we train one-on-one coaches. So my space is primarily there. I'm also a corporate-based mindfulness trainer, and I work in the potential project side of our business, and we'll tell you a little bit about that later. So the context that we look at is this context of continuous change. So what's happened, and happening at an increasingly accelerated rate, is economic and business factors are changing. On an annual basis, up until this year, 2020, it's almost the dark ages now, things have shifted massively. One of the things that we're dealing with one of our very large clients right now is just the shift in customer behaviors has really created just a need for massive innovation in their way that they sell and work. And as Victor mentioned, particularly in fields like recruitment, where the adaptation is very much needed. Most companies are struggling to adapt. Demographic factors, this includes the number of people at different ages, different parts of the world, but also the impact of those. So the impact of millennials, the impact of an aging business population, working population, but also a need for that wisdom in the organization. Social, cultural, political, Hong Kong's been racked with protests, and in fact, protests are happening all over the world. Political factors are massive right now. And then natural factors, stuff like COVID, stuff like we're in a monsoon, today in Hong Kong, changing weather patterns, changing resources, and then of course the changes in technology. We worked with one company around developing a growth mindset as they're looking to shift to digitize their business. And we looked at what kind of things they need to change in order to be able to embrace and empower and really make that change happen in a timely and seamless way. So we're all experiencing these changes out there. That's what's happening out there in the world. But what's happening for us, how we experience that, through our sister organization, the Potential Project, we've developed a little acronym that helps us say that. So the world out there is changing in that way. How we experience it is described in 4 short phrases or words. One is pressure, an increase in pressure. We just feel pressure to do more, pressure to work harder, pressure to work later, pressured from technology even to be available, to be productive, to do more with less. always on. We feel like we're always on, like we're never off. And that can be because of work, but it also can be just because of our own action addiction toward always picking up our phone, always looking, always doing something. We're information overloaded. There's just too much, too fast, too available to us. And often we feel like we just don't have it. I just look at the ever-growing number of emails that I have not opened, and how many of those are things I want to read one day. And probably the bottom 800 are now irrelevant, just because it's been too long. And finally, this leads to us feeling distressed, distracted. We're distracted from distractions by distractions, and we feel this sense of distress in us. I'll never get it done. It's always changing. There's too much uncertainty, and we feel this sense of distress. So the next poll is going to be about you figuring out, or just sharing, which one of those seems to be impacting you the most. And then one option there is all of the above. And is someone going to help me and launch this poll? Or am I needing to figure out how to do it here at the last minute? Okay, so I guess I'll do poll 2. I have. So this poll is launched. Which one of these do you experience the most? So just click whatever you want to click, and let's see what happens as we go. And then we'll share that. And this is your experience of the external reality. And it's really interesting to just find out and think about it in this way. Which one of these is the one that you experience the most? We're at about 70% of people have replied, so that's great. We're almost got everybody. And that'll give us a pretty good picture of at least this room. So here's what you said, just so you have a sense that actually the ones that tied were always on and information overloaded. That feeling and that experience, and that's really, really common. Very, very common that those two come out on top. Very often distressed or distracted comes out more, but that anxiety from being always on and that anxiety from information overloaded often take people to the next level of stress. So there we go. All right. So how does that affect us as leaders? Well, another interesting thing is some studies that, again, we did, and this is through the Potential Project, is that there's a recent study, Gallup, where 13% of the global workforce is engaged and 24% is actively disengaged in the company mission. And what that really means, if you could think about it this way, is you're in a boat and you're trying to go in that direction, and 13 people are rowing in that direction. At the back of the boat, there's 24 people rowing the other way. And then there's a bunch of people in the middle of the boat that are neither engaged or actively disengaged. So you can imagine what that does for productivity. The second interesting result is a lack of happiness. 65% of employees said they would not take a pay raise if their boss or leader was fired. 65%. And then finally, lack of leadership. 77% of leaders they self-report, I am an engaging leader. I motivate and lead my people. And 82% of the people say, no, you don't. And in spite of massive investments in leadership development. So what we're in the midst of is this really difficult environment, this rapidly changing environment, this increase of pressure on leadership to be more effective, this level of disengagement between leaders and organizations and their employees. And in the midst of that, we are trying to lead, trying to be skillful, doing our best. And this is where we want to help people and really move toward that. So here's some major leadership or organizational shifts that you might find yourself in. The first is from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. Fixed mindsets tend to use words like I've arrived, this is our thing, we don't like change, we don't want to shift, we've always done it this way. But also we're an industry leader. Even if you are an industry leader, it's still a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is constantly asking, what if? We're not good at this yet. I'm not as skilled yet. Their language is very different. A fixed mindset would say, I am not good at managing my schedule in this crazy time. A growth mindset would say, I haven't adapted yet. I haven't made the changes I need to make in order to shift. So this is a big part for individuals, for leaders, and for organizations. The next shift is business drivers are changing. So no longer are business agendas necessarily driving what's happening with organization, but there's this movement toward what we call future back, outside in, serving the needs of current and future stakeholders. So this is like value creating organizations. So some of this comes from what we invest in, some of it comes from what our employees demand, but really we're continually challenged to look at the present stakeholders and the future stakeholders. People 50 years ahead of us now, what will they judge us for? How will this decision impact my grandchildren, my grandchildren's children? And organizations are beginning to ask these questions, and leaders need to begin to have a much larger frame of reference when it comes to why we do what we do and what we do, how we do it, what resources we exploit and use, and what we do with that. And then another massive shift is toward away from heroic leadership, the one leader, the CEO that knows everything, that does everything, that makes all the masterful decisions, that is able to contain and understand everything. And the shift away from that is moving in a lot of layers. One of the layers is just beginning to distribute trust and control within the organization, because there's too much variety between the things we need to know. We can't know it all. And at the far end of the spectrum is HPVC teams, which means high performance value creating teams. So the shift here is from leaders who are doing everything themselves or in charge of performance, motivating, challenging, toward this distributed trust, distributed leadership on teams, where the teams are getting a result that's more than they could get as individuals, and that team, the team itself and the organization is focused on value creation for their stakeholders, and sometimes we say for the customers of your customer and even their customers. So beginning to have that team shift, and that's really the focus that we'll move to at this point. But I'm happy to just pause for a moment because I've been talking quite quickly, and we're going to shift gears into the team space. Let me just see if there's a question that I might need to answer. But if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and that would give us a chance to answer it. I'll give you just a moment to do that, and if nothing happens, I'll shift to the next slide. Okay, I don't see anything coming in. So why team coaching? Well, team coaching is an emerging developmental intervention or investment that organizations are taking. And the rise of teams has created the rise of value for team coaching. So a lot of reasons. One, this heroic leader. Complexity and adaptability are too great, and it can't be held or done by just one person. In many cases, leaders struggling with imposter syndrome, part of that is they actually don't understand a lot of what happens in their organization. Their discomfort with that, they can feel like they're an imposter. A skillful leader would actually be able to say, I am never going to know, and I'm hiring you people to know these things, be experts. And my role is to lead through you and help you develop high-performing teams so that and communicate cross with each other and upwards what needs to happen. But if every decision needs to wait for me to understand it, then we'll never go anywhere. Just too many layers of complexity and needs for adaptability. Groups of high-performing individuals do not equal a high-performing team. It's one of the big shifts that we help organizations make is most of you, if you work in an organization, you're on a team or multiple teams or you have teams. The question that we ask, and we have some tools we use to assess and diagnose this for you and can consult with you around it is, one, do you have groups, a bunch of people moving in the same direction, or do you have teams, a number of people, a small number of people who are aligned around a common purpose? They're deeply committed and interdependent on each other for success. And that's a team. So just because you have this top 5 salespeople doesn't mean that those 5 people together on a sales team will perform and get that logarithmic result very often that teams can produce. So, and in many cases, actually, they're less effective. So sometimes we advise organizations, you don't need to be teams, just be groups. Or don't even be groups, just share information with each other and let individuals do their thing. But if you want teams, then we can certainly help you craft them and skillfully lead them. Leaders and managers regularly and consistently come to us as individual coaches with the question about how do I lead and develop my team? Sometimes it's that question, and very often it's about my team is not performing. How do I help them perform? And then they need to modify and change their behaviors in order to be more effective. Millennials on teams desire a higher level of independence as a team. They want to make decisions. They want to be involved in things. They want to understand things. They want to have more ownership of all sorts of processes that many of us who learn to lead in a different generation aren't as comfortable with. So there's some big shifts here. And that just goes to the last point, which is to be a leader, you need a team leader. You need to be team literate, language of teams, how teams work, help them to function more skillfully, and skilled in enabling others to lead and develop teams. So that's really, really a key, is that the leader needs to develop the ability to do this. And that's another way that we coach the team through the team leader. We also coach the team leader to be more skillful as a team leader, and we can, we also do training around that as well to develop team coaching skills with leaders. I have a project right now with a large pharmaceutical where I've just been contracted to coach the team leader because I can't travel and work with the team like I was doing, to work with the team leader to help him to develop more team coaching skills so that he can more effectively help his team of leaders become a leadership team. So there you go. And a question has come in. Let me pause and answer that before I shift to explain what team coaching is. Question is, every leader thinks that they are excellent coaches. How do internal coaches manage such leaders who usually are not? Well, again, we'd avoid broad generalizations that every leader thinks they're an excellent coach, but lots of people think they are excellent coaches and they're usually not. Properly trained internal coaches, if the person is, it depends where they are in the hierarchy above you, but if they're their leader, then they have some knowledge about coaching. And my suggestion would be, and I've worked with some internal coaches around this, is that the internal coach uses coaching skills to help their leader, but just understand things differently. But probably the best result comes from that leader actually being coached by someone who is outside of the organization and is properly skilled or exposed to events like this, where someone who's maybe slightly more of an expert can give them perspective. One company that we work with has this problem. The leader thinks he knows what coaching is and he doesn't. He thinks he's a coach and he isn't. And HR hired us to help develop coaching skills within his organization. And then we invited him to participate as a role model for that particular program. And that led to him and I having a number of side conversations and his exploration and understanding increasing. And he's still not a good coach, but he's shifted and he understands it. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Thank you for the question, and feel free to type another question if you want. So what team coaching really is, and we partner with a gentleman named Professor David Clutterbuck, just a thought leader in team coaching, founder of the EMCC globally, author of over 70 books. And I just love his phrase that we help teams and team leaders to have the conversations they need to have with themselves and others. So if you can imagine this from a team perspective, you're helping, say, 6 people on a team have the conversations they need to have with each other, maybe as individuals, maybe as 2-to-1s, but also as a team, and also with their team leader. So all that relational complexity needs to be there. And then that team also needs to have conversations with their stakeholders within their organization, outside of their organization, in order to develop and improve their processes and their performance. Often when you want a team to improve, so much of our interventions are inward. Team building, team facilitation, training. Part of the team coaching process, especially the system that we use, is it interacts with the entire system. So we look at the purpose of the team. We look at the external stakeholders and the external processes by which they engage and work with stakeholders that act on the team and how the team acts on others. We look at the relationships within the team with each other, levels of trust, psychological safety, healthy levels of conflict, and work with the team to develop that. We work with internal processes of the team itself. How do they decide? How do they communicate decisions? How do they prioritize? How do they divide labor? So that's all part of what we do with the team. And then we also work with the leadership. Leadership qualities need to be present on the team. Maybe not all of them are with the leader. And then we also work to develop a learning team. So a high-performing learning team that creates value is the ultimate sort of goal of all this. So the idea is that the sum of that performance is more than the team members. There's alignment around purpose, effectively partners more with stakeholders, and creates alignment of their individual goals to team goals to organizational goals. So on one team that I worked with, one of the things that emerged was that one of the team members wanted a promotion, basically wanted the job of the team leader or to move into another part of the organization. Her intention was made pretty clear. People knew this, and it had caused a bit of trust issues, and people actually felt betrayed. But actually, you know, the desire of a team member to grow, to develop, to change, to move teams, to become a leader is a healthy part. So part of what we did was helped the team to have the conversations they need to have about that, so that trust was reestablished, and so that the team and this individual were able to work together because the team needed to excel. This individual was able then to understand that as the team excelled, that her profile was raised. The team understood her desire, and we're able to support her and also step out of the way of certain opportunities that might come up without feeling upset about it and questioning her motives. So it's a very interesting dynamic that shifted, and it led to a change in the company. So the ultimate thing that we're really aiming at as we work to build teams is to move beyond performance. So team performance is really, and I just need to adjust my screen a bit, I can't see my slide, what we deliver now and in the short term. So one of the ways we work with teams, particularly right now, teams are asking us, how do we perform virtually? Managers, we did a survey of an organization that we work with, and we're working with a whole level of managers and leaders within that organization. And we did a survey a month ago around this. And one of the biggest issues was around, how do I motivate my team virtually? And how do I make sure they're doing what they need to do? So this really strong sense of, how do I do control? How do I trust my team? How do I actually manage them when they're somewhere else? So that's a big challenge that this particular team came up with. And again, we're helping them to address that as best as we can. So we want to help teams move beyond performance, but we start with performance. So there are some big ideas, high performance learning, value creating teams, but there's also the beginning where organizations' pain point is, how do we perform? And how do I, as a team leader, help my teams perform? And how can teams help our organization perform more effectively and more efficiently right now? And the second layer is around capability. So this is midterm, innovating products, process, improving relationships, medium to long term. So this is building the capability of the team, improving and increasing its capability, which will serve the organization in the longer term. And then finally, this level of capacity, which is future fit, co-creating more value for the future of the team, working smarter, not harder. How do we build team culture? How do we create agile, skillful teams where we can distribute trust and trust in their decision-making? How do we create an organization that's comfortable with and constantly challenged by teams that are made up of multidisciplinary parts of the organization? How do we push down decision-making and trust that the right kinds of decisions are made? And beginning to build that toward the future and develop that as an organizational capacity so that we're actually becoming the kind of organization that's truly adaptive and future fit and basically able to handle whatever changes the world throws at us. One of our clients right now is an organization that was working toward building capacity for a number of years. And the HR director was really focused on this particular area quite strongly. And she was really a bit of an outlier, and her company didn't really understand her desire to push for this particular agenda. But they allowed it to happen. They started to do more teams. They started to shift and build different skills. They focused on resilience. They focused on mental health. They focused on well-being. They focused on helping people become individually effective, and then focused on healthy teams. And what's really happened as the COVID crisis hit their industry quite hard, high levels of engagement, high levels of loyalty, high levels of understanding the difficulty of making organizational decisions, and high levels of innovation as they were adaptive, and they took on the challenges without someone having to tell them what to do. So there's this really strong bottom-up movement. It's a very powerful example of how team capacity can be built within an organization. So I'm going to open the last poll, which is really just to find out what you'd like to know more about. So some of you won't ask questions, but I'd be happy for you just to respond and say, here's what I'd like to know more about. One, this will help Boyden to figure out what they want to do in the future in terms of other things. But two, it will direct, you know, maybe the examples or some of the sharing that I do for the next minutes up until we come to our break or our question and answer period, which can begin at any time. So what would you like to know more about? How to cope and perform in the paid reality? What is a growth mindset? High performance teams? Or the other options that are here? All right. More people have joined as the webinar was moving along. Welcome here. All right, so about half of you have voted. So if you haven't voted and you're thinking, oh, someone else will do it, then now might be a time to just interact and make that happen. I'll just make my aircon a bit colder. All right. So yeah, we're still at that 66% number. So happy to have a few more people go. I'll give it just a minute or two. Right now, it looks like performance, capability, and capacity are rising up. And high performance teams, coaching and growth mindsets are equal in that particular space. So the rest of you, if you want to take the opportunity just to engage and impact how we spend the next minutes, that would be wonderful. And then also, there are some questions that look like they're coming. I never know where that is. There we go. Great. Okay, so let me end that poll and just share the results with you so you can see what you said. Definitely there's not a big win of performance, capability, and capacity. But let me share a little bit more about that, and then we'll move into questions and answers. So these are really three lenses that leaders are beginning to look at organizations through. So there is a continuous focus and need for performance, and that's really key for us as an organization. We definitely know that often a pain point is performance. And we don't want to be too pie in the sky about things and just talk about some big items around like value creation and serving future generations, which are wonderful things, but very often the business reality, especially right now, is I just need to survive, and I'm not going to move away from our commitment to environment, to treating people fairly. Confidence and core values, but at the same time, what I really need to do is perform. So I think resonant and skillful organizations that help organizations or help people need to make sure that they balance those things, right? So performance and other pieces. So this thought of thinking about how do we perform is the beginning of action. But organizations are going to defining a little bit more. What kind of capability do we need to build? What kind of capacity do we need to build? And a big shift that's happening is from the systemic thinking movement around this. So performance is often the short-time solution. Capability becomes a little bit more systemic. How do we build systems that are capable of creating higher levels of performance? How do we hire differently? What kind of skills do we teach people? And what kind of things do we reward in order to create capability and a system that is infused and moved to and leveraged, optimized towards capability? And then finally, looking at capacity, what are the skills we need in the future? And one of the skills that we focus on a lot is building in that skill of a growth mindset, building in that adaptive capacity. So a leader's ability to adapt is the capacity to adapt, the capacity to go in a completely different direction, the capacity to let go of our ego and step away from a product that might have defined us, that just might not be the product that's needed in the future. Change direction, make hard decisions, building that capacity throughout the whole organization. So how do we develop agile teams? How do we develop the qualities of leadership that can be shared with team members? So those are kinds of the questions that we work with. To do a deeper presentation, I would definitely want to prepare more specifically to challenge that particular area, but perhaps we can work with Boyden to focus specifically on some ways to short-term improve performance, mid-term improve capability, and long-term build capacity, and give you some detail around how that works. All right. So what I'll do, there's some questions. So we're in the question and answer part. I don't actually, I just need my team's support a little bit to tell me, is somebody enabling people to unmute themselves if they want, but I'll begin with some questions that are in the chat right now. So first question is sales coaching gaining momentum in the market? Sales training has always been a constant. It's always been a thing that it's one area that people that are consultants and trainers will focus on, because sales forces are a high level of turnover and there's always a need. Sales coaching as an intervention is gaining momentum. The primary area where sales coaching is happening is in the leader of sales teams being coached on how they can more effectively develop their teams, lead them, be more skillful. At the sales level, there's some group coaching that's beginning to happen more, which is helping groups of salespeople to move. But then you have some very strong personalities depending on the environment that you're selling and what the product is. So the challenge for organizations is, do we invest in a coach for our salespeople and help them improve, even though that person, is that where we want to invest, is the challenge. So that's where group coaching can be more valuable. And then developing this skill of coaching for the sales manager. So developing the capability to coach would be the way that organizations are tending to invest right now. And that's gaining momentum. Because the coaching behaviors are correlated to engagement, motivation, job satisfaction, and ultimately retention. And the turnover in sales is just a high hidden cost in most organizations. Another question. What's the most difficult issues that you've had to help a team on? This probably relates to the earlier question. One of the hardest things to work with a team on is when the leader perceives themselves in a very different way than their team perceives them. So when we do so I mentioned we do team consultation and assessment. So part of the process is assessing teams and assessing the leadership, doing interviews, doing diagnostics to come up with things. So one of the hardest assignments that I'm still in the midst of is working with the team who has a high level of disconnect from their leader. So their leader believes that he is different than they perceive him. And even as he changes, the changes are not landing in his team. So the challenge in that context is that there's such a large disconnect. The leader doesn't have a high visible ego at play in this particular context. However, and he just has such a large gap, perceptual gap. So what's really challenging is to keep the team engaged and learning and growing, and manage their impatience with their leader, and help the leader also manage his frustration with himself as he's trying to adapt behaviors, but it's just not landing correctly. So in that particular context, it's very, very challenging, and still is. So at this stage, I'm working with that leader individually, more than with their team. And the team, one of the behaviors that we're practicing is allowing the team to make more decisions. And in this case, again, when we train team coaches, we talk about team typology and different team leadership models. He likely wants to be involved as a leader in a way that the team doesn't need him to be. So ultimately, he'll be probably the most effective if he releases the idea of being a much more part of the team kind of a leader, and accepts the fact that he actually isn't part of that team, and stays as a leader. And if he's here today, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking about someone else. Okay, a couple of other questions come in. Can I suggest what it takes to create a coaching culture within an organization so that all the coaching effort will fall into place? Wow. Can I suggest what it takes to create a coaching culture within an organization so that all the coaching effort will fall into place? Wow, that's it's more than a webinar, that one. And certainly it's the kind of conversation that we work with helping develop team cultures. And certainly our CEO and chairman, Tony Dickel, does a lot of work and research in this particular space. And that might be a good topic for a future session. I love the fact that it's so the coaching effort will fall into place. So creating a coaching culture, there's a number of ways that organizations have tried to do this. Okay? The primary way that they try to do it is they will get coaching for the team leaders. They'll get coaching for the team leaders so the coaches have effective, efficient coaching and are open to it and value it. At the same time, they'll very often do a coaching skills type of program with managers and leaders within the organization to begin to infuse coaching throughout. And very often it just stops there. And there's a few HR people that are trained to coach, and they try to help either skillfully or not skillfully. So there's a lot of dimensions to this. If there's not trust within the organization, if there's not transparency, if there's not an actual commitment to growth and development, then there's those barriers emerge. And that's why it's a very complex question. I would say where organizations tend to fail is they don't create coaching champions. So, an ideal scenario is training up a lot of people in coaching skills, and then the ones that sort of emerge, recruit them to be coaching champions because they're influencers and they're interested, and then invest in building their skills so that they become even more skillful, and then collect and gather the stories from people that have been coached so that there's this idea that coaching isn't, you know, a remedial solution, but it's something that's valued. And one shift in an organization that related to the coaching culture is where people said, I got a coach, I have a coach, I get a coach, versus you need coaching. So there was this badge of honor related to having a coach. So starting with an initial investment around coaching skills leads to the maybe proper certification and elevation of coaching within that organization. But ensuring that it pushes up to the top levels and gets through that middle management level, which often tends to stick. And also we need to deal with that arrogance of the leader who thinks they're a great coach and they're not. And one of the advantages that we bring to organizations sometimes when we train their leaders is we have a dual accredited European Mentoring and Coaching Council, ICF, rigorous professional coach certification program. So if the leader gets into that and has to graduate, then they're going to be challenged in ways that are different than internal coaching. So there's observation, there's mentoring, there's expectation of passing levels of coaching. And leaders we've had in that, you know, one leader said to me, I have to get this right. He was really struggling with it because he was too much of a controller, too much of a director. He said, I have to get this right. I can't fail this program because it would be too embarrassing for me. So he shifted his behaviors because he didn't want to fail. And that's, you know, the motivation doesn't necessarily matter in that particular case. So once we get the leaders engaged, then the key is to begin to create a system of coaching within that organization where it becomes systemic, where it's done at each level. And then also we need to bring in coaching supervision. So one company we work with, their thing is they don't know if coaching is actually happening. They know conversations are happening. They don't know is it actually coaching or not. So there's much more rigor around it, where goals are transparent, where progress is measured, where even internal coaches are rated. There's all kinds of ways that we can begin to elevate and infuse coaching in the system. And then team coaching being one of the key ones in organizations that have teams now, where they're, so there's a broader experience of coaching. And the goal of team coaching is to help the team learn, or the goal of skilled professional team coaching is to help the team to learn to coach itself. So as that begins to happen, then you have a faster movement through the organization. So it is a big question. I answered it a little bit long. Hopefully I gave some insights, certainly not a complete or perfect answer, but I did the best I could. A couple of more questions. When we do coaching with a team leader, how can we avoid the possible bias and assumptions that the leader has made on his or her team? I would say we can't avoid them. We need to bring them into the conversation. So the biases of the team leader is part of their self-awareness journey, and the assumptions that they've made about themselves and their team become part of that conversation that they need to have with themselves and others. And again, if we're trying to help them be more skillful, then some of those need to be put on the table with their team and addressed. And there's tools and techniques that we have in our global practitioner certification program that definitely enable those kinds of conversations. And there's some techniques to do that in a way that saves face and is non-invasive and non-threatening. But yeah, I wouldn't say we can avoid it. I think it's more like, how can we help the leader to become aware of their biases, aware of their assumptions, and how those are impacting their team. And I think the thing that I found, which I just say, which is interesting about the system that we use, so this purpose, external processes, relationships, internal processes, leadership, and learning. That process, one of the things that often does, and it worked with a team recently that I was working with, is what united them, what pulled them together, what made them want to change was as they developed a shared purpose. And we answered a question which is really essential, which is what's the nature of our interdependence? What do we need each other in order to achieve? What can we do together that we can't do alone? And as they developed that was external related. And as they started to move toward that purpose, we stopped trying to fix like the dramas inside the team and started to say, what is getting in the way of us achieving this? And once that shift happened, that team, a lot of the issues just went away. And then we had to have conversations about biases and assumptions within that team. That was a part of it. An interesting side comment on that is that the team leader and I would meet before every team coaching engagement. And they told me, like, oh, in the beginning, they were telling me, watch out for this person and be careful about that. And that conversation changed over time because their judgments and their biases, they needed to learn to let go of. And I, challenged them to think differently about it. And also challenged the team to have some of those conversations they needed to have with each other so that they could be more effective. One more question, and then we'll end for the day. Certainly excited that you're listening and you're asking good questions. What's the best way to coach or lead a team within an organization that's highly siloed with perhaps different objectives and targets? This is interesting because I have a team like this that I know quite well, and the leader really says, we're really siloed, organizations like this. And my response to them was, well, you have targets to meet within your team. So what kind of team do you want to be? Who do you want to be? The organization gives you a broad mandate. You can dance the dance any way you want. What kind of team do you need to be in order to be effective in this siloed organization? Right? I don't need to change the silos. That's the culture. But the idea is, how can you build a team that's effective in this environment? What kind of skills do people need to have? What kind of skills does the team need to have so that we can work together? Your external processes and systems are silos, politics, infighting, different objectives and targets. That's the system that you're in. So how do you be an effective team within that system? Especially when they couldn't change the system, right? So it's a very special situation. So that's me. Thank you so much for all your questions. I'm guessing we're right near the top of the hour because Victor has appeared to close us off for the day. So from Transcend and myself, certainly say thank you very much for the opportunity to share with you today. Thanks for your engagement and good questions. And with that, over to you, Victor.
Thanks, Greg, and thanks to everyone for attending our webinar. We see a lot of interest in high-performance teams, as well as performance capability and capacity, depending from your feedback, from the questions, high level of interest on coaching culture, and the challenges you leaders face in your own companies with regards to bias, with regards to culture. Come to us for help. Either email Craig at partnerships@transcend-intl.com, email myself or your Boyden consultant. Again, thank you for attending our webinar. Good afternoon and good morning to you.